Hey, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Higdon, and today I'm joined by Nikki. She's a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Connecticut.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we invited her on to share her story so that it inspires you. She's going to share a little bit about her journey, what has helped her in building her private practice. She is a boot camper, so I'll be talking to you a little bit about how boot camp has helped her too in the journey.
Yeah.
So Nikki, how long have you been in practice for?
So I have been in practice since 2013.
Where'd
There was
you go?
about a year hiatus. Well, the idea, I was working full-time in a hospital in an inpatient psychiatric unit, and wanted the flexibility of part-time hours and making your own hours and being your own boss. And so that's what started it. And there's been a few hiccups along the way where at one point I decided maybe I didn't want to do private practice. So I took about a year off. And then I went back to it and I juggled both part-time private practice and part-time at the hospital. And now I'm kind of back where I started, which is full-time. I mean, part-time hours, right? But full-time private practice. So it's been an adventure for the past 7 years, six years, I guess.
I think that this actually does happen more often than not, that sometimes people take breaks. Can you talk a little bit about what was the impetus for that and what was your experience?
So it was actually completely unrelated to private practice, but it was because I had a loss in the family, specifically a spousal loss. And so I was just like, I'm having a hard enough time supporting myself, so I can't support others, right? In this way. Yeah. But I think that, for anybody in any kind of, with any kind of life stressor or major change in life, whether it's an ability or a disability or a loss of sorts or a move or whatever it might be, sometimes you just have to take a step back to take care of yourself, right? Because that's not fair to you and that's not fair to potential clients, right? If you're not on.
How did coming back from that break influence your business?
Well, I think at first it was a free-for-all, right? Because I was excited to be back in private practice, but I was totally disorganized, right? And so I was like, I'll take whoever calls and I'll get on as many insurance panels as I can. And so I didn't have a niche and didn't really know what I was doing, really.
And when did you join Bootcamp? I'm trying to remember.
Almost 3 years ago, or I guess technically 3 years ago. So around this time we would have had our interview call or whatever, right? Because I had my call with you, not Miranda. But it was spring 2017 was my first round.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you joined Bootcamp, your practice was disorganized. There's no niche. You
absolutely.
Taking whoever called.
Yep. And then so at the end of 2016, I had stopped taking insurance. And so my caseload dropped in half. And I was working part-time in the emergency room, which I've shared about, in the group before. And so the goal was I'm going to join Bootcamp, and within a year I'm going to leave the hospital. But I need the structure that this course could have provided, to be able to kind of structure my time. Because when I didn't, being disorganized and not knowing what am I doing Mondays? What am I doing Tuesdays? What am I doing Wednesdays? Right. Without that clear structure, it was like, oh, so-and-so canceled their appointment, so I guess I'm not going to the office today. And I'll go tomorrow. And then, some days you'd have 3 patients and other days you'd have 6 patients. And I was just kind of, just winging it. Because, part of the premise, right, of business school bootcamp for therapists is the idea that we don't have business degrees, right? And we didn't go to business school. And these aren't things we learn in grad school. So I try to be compassionate with my past self about how disorganized I was and how I was just kind of flying, winging it as I went and flying by the seat of my pants, right?
Yeah. So how did your practice progress after you enrolled in Bootcamp?
Yeah. So with at the very end, or even maybe during that first round of Bootcamp, the first things that I did was that I moved from therapy sites, nothing against therapy sites, but it was rather pricey and didn't necessarily have the best SEO. And so I moved to Squarespace and really niched down into grief and loss, which is what I had been wanting to do, to kind of specialize in. And then, so I did those 2 things. And then I got comfortable because before then, I didn't know how to have the money conversations, right? I had a sliding scale. I had a much lower fee. I didn't really know what my money fee should be and how I should calculate it, or even the idea of a calculator being out there, of figuring out all your expenses, what you need to take home, what your taxes are, all that stuff. So, so I got rid of my sliding scale fee. I increased my fee, and then got more comfortable having that conversation with clients when they would call about who are you? What are you coming in for? How could I help? kind of developing a little bit of rapport, right? And then having the conversation about scheduling. And then at the end, kind of having the conversation. So here's the deal with insurance, right? And, over time that's gotten easier and easier, obviously.
Yeah.
And successful also. So,
yeah. So first things were kind of getting organized on your intake processes.
Yes.
And
all those systems.
And getting your marketing hub in a place where you had a little bit more control over the SEO and the content.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things.
And it was just easier to use.
Yes. Yes, I know. And there's reasons why we recommend Squarespace for any DIY. And we just find that the SEO and the design, it's easy for any therapist to walk in and kind of have a website in a couple
Not to mention
hours.
that video that you guys have in Bootcamp, right? Where it was like an hour-long video and you just follow along and create your site. And I was like, wait, what? It was really that easy? Because I am not, for anybody listening, I am not at all like tech savvy.
Right.
And people consistently say like, wow, you have such a beautiful website. I'm like, well, I feel like I didn't do any of it. Squarespace did it, but really I just kind of, put things where they belonged and type some words in and then boom, there it is.
Right. But you had a process for writing those words too.
Totally. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What has it been like to really get solid in your niche? What has that done for you as a clinician, and what has it done for your clients?
Yeah. So you probably don't remember this because you probably don't remember every single call you've had, right? In terms of interviewing people for Bootcamp. But one of the things that you had said to me was that I lacked confidence, and it always stuck with me because I remember thinking like in the therapy room, that's not the case, but outside of that, that's sometimes can be the case, right? In terms of these systems, the marketing and things like that. So all that to say though, that I do think that the more that I've kind of specialized in this work and the more that I've kind of made myself visible to other clinicians, and I've been on 2 previous podcasts, and I had a TV interview with a local news station talking specifically about grief and loss and what's normal, what's not normal, what to expect, what not to expect, like how to cope, etc. And so confidence and like being comfortable, being visible, and like finding that balance between imposter syndrome that we all struggle with to a degree, right? Versus like, hey, my message might not work for some, but it works for others, right? And of course that translates into the work with clients who feel like you really get them and you really know what you're doing, right? And that you're comfortable with the content that they're bringing in and capable of treating it.
Right. I think it really does instill more trust.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then immediacy when in the beginning of treatment, when someone knows what you do and that you can help in this specific area. It really does give confidence to both of you because you know what you're there for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So where are you at now with your practice? I mean,
so so let's see here. When looping back a little or backtracking a little bit, when I had said that I was in the emergency room when I started Bootcamp, I was a 24-hour-a-week position. And I gave myself a year when I first started Bootcamp. Like, I'm going to quit the job in a year. It did take me 2, but I finally quit in April of 2019. So it's been almost a year. And so since, it was really unfounded fear that was holding me back. Like, how am I going to support myself as a, being a single person, owning a home, like, and for people who know Connecticut property taxes are very high, right? And so I was like, how is that possible? How can I make this work? And I remember there was a woman who, I don't remember what her name was, but who partly inspired me, I think this was in the spring of 2018, she put the video at the beginning of Bootcamp, like, when we do our little video journals. And she talked about being a solo parent with 2 little ones and like doing private practice full time. And I remember thinking like, okay, like if she can do it, like why can't I do it? Right. Why can't I trust that somehow it'll all work out and I can afford to, support myself and whatnot in private practice. And so I finally took that leap in April of 2019 and I left. So I'm still there as a casual employee or a per diem employee. So I pick up a shift here and there. But after I left, the month after I left, my income doubled from the previous month. I didn't realize how exhausting that place was and how much energy that it took, even though I was only there like literally 24 hours per week. But it just took so much out of me. Right. And so, when I started the private practice in 2017, it was, kind of juggling those 2 things. And then now for almost the past year, it's just been primarily private practice.
We
And so
say it's hard to ride two horses at once.
yes, it's, but you know, it's so funny because once it's like, it's not until you stop doing it, right?
Yeah, that you
That you
realize.
realize it, right? Because it's hard to believe it. And going back to trust, right? Trusting yourself, right? That you know, that it really is better or easier, or you can make it work just by riding the one rather than kind of balancing between the two, right?
I think that that's a common feeling, you know, of making that leap. Even so in boot camp, we teach like how to figure out your bridge goal and how much to set aside
Yep.
so that you can
I
make
remember that
the leap.
video. I've watched it multiple times.
But you could do it over and over and over again and have the money there or whatever and still feel like, this feels safe. And I think it's I think it's especially interesting when you are the primary provider or you are single. And like you said, like you have a mortgage and all these things.
Yeah.
It feels even more intense because there's no one else, you know, it's you. And I appreciate you sharing that because I think it is a common experience and something that people don't talk enough about in terms of making that leap. There is a bit of faith in there. There is a bit of risk, but so is a risk having a job. You could be laid off, you know, just never know.
It's true.
But for some reason, we're able to ignore that risk of having a job, for example. I remember working inpatient and some days you'd show up and they'd be like, census is low, go home. And you'd be like,
wow.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
You know, so as much as it was my job and a full-time thing, it wasn't the most reliable always either. So, but it's funny. It's a question of, can I trust myself? Can I rely on myself to make it happen?
And going back to, you know, we were talking about what has the private practice looked like over the years. And, you know, during a previous iteration of doing private practice full-time, like, you know, again, going back to I was disorganized. I didn't really have a structure for myself. And I think that was a fear also that like, once I pull that structure of the routine that the regular hospital shifts provide, right? How am I going to structure myself? How can I trust myself that I'll be able to like get tasks done that I need to get done, or that I'll be able to kind of maintain this boundary in terms of these are the hours I'm at the office these days and this day, right? And kind of keep everybody within those parameters rather than be like, oh, sure, you can't come in the afternoon. Yeah, I'll come in the morning. Even though like I'm better in the afternoon.
Right. It's a whole other kind of, you don't have a job holding the boundaries for you. Instead, you have to hold them for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. What is your next step, you think, in the practice? Are you in a place where it's good and you want to hold, or?
Well, so the one thing that I'm working toward is developing a course. So I had done, and part of the process of kind of specializing in grief and loss, I had offered a CEU opportunity to other therapists called Getting Comfortable with Grief. Because I think lots of us, you know, we talk about not having business school education, right, in our programs, but there's not a lot of this coursework either. And so I offered that, and, you know, people have asked for more. But what I find is that I'm a bit of an introvert. Most people don't believe when I say that, but like, you know, being on for a 3-hour training plus all the prep work in advance, you know, beforehand is exhausting. Right. And so the goal for the next few months is to really work on developing an online version of that. That's a bit, that's expanded. So, but I don't know that I'll make it CEUs or not, because then it just gets complicated in terms of people who take it in state versus out of state, and how do the out of state people get it? You know, I don't know if I want to deal with that. But I would just like it to be kind of a service to the community of people who want to learn a little bit more, but maybe they're more visual learners or audio learners rather than like reading a textbook about what is, because it's kind of a dry subject matter, right? When you're reading like a book about a textbook about that.
Well, so maybe that's something we can work on some more in boot camp this next round with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What would you say was the most valuable part of joining boot camp for you?
That's a tough one. Like I struggle with types of questions like the most valuable or my favorite part or whatever. But I think that
we'll just say one of.
Yeah, I think it's I guess I'd probably say the money conversation, like we were talking about earlier, and also just the systems, and just like, you know, having clear data, like tracking referrals and tracking like how often you get referral, like are there seasonal patterns to your referrals, or are there other patterns that you can identify, or who are your referral sources, or just getting myself very clear on what's the purpose of all of this, and getting myself very organized, right? That's been
Mm-hmm.
very helpful. And then having the systems in place. And so systems about organization, systems about money, systems about, a fixed schedule that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Those have all been really helpful. And also I certainly, the community of my peers, right? That,
Yeah.
you as the instructor and Miranda as the instructor, excuse me, can say like, oh yeah, this is like, you're going to make it work. Like, this is our program. This is the success rate, this, that, and the other thing. Right. But when you see tangible evidence in your peers, whether they're peers that I don't know, but that, post in the Facebook group, or peers that I've developed a mastermind with, or another one, Mallory, who lives here in Connecticut, and she's kind of a local boot camp buddy, right? So like when you see that tangible evidence, like it makes it more believable and more possible, right? So that's certainly been helpful, very valuable as well.
It's good to know you're not alone.
Yeah.
I think, for someone who's listening, who's thinking about should they invest in support for their business, what do you have to say to that?
I think it was definitely worth it. I think that, perhaps I set my expectations too high in terms of kind of giving myself that year timeline, and it took me a little bit longer, right?
Yeah.
And took me 2 years instead of 1 year. So maybe it was about my expectations, or maybe it was about like, I just always had I was complacent, right? Because I always had the hospital to kind of fall back on, right? So it's hard to know. But either way, whether or not, and I don't tend to kind of rush through life because I'm like, I'll get there when I get there, there's no rush. But at the same time, like I think that I think had I put more focus and more energy into it in terms of leaving the hospital and growing the practice sooner, I probably could have, right?
Sure.
And so for people that might be thinking about joining, but that are thinking like, well, how quickly could I get that return on my investment? Like, I think it's about what we put into it and how ready you might be to like quit the other job that you have going on, right? That's distracting you from the growth that you could be doing in your practice.
I mean, that's my story, right? Like I wanted out of the county. It was very motivating.
Yeah.
So
it's nice. It's nice being your own boss.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, I always say I have a lot of bosses because my clients are my boss, right? But it's nice kind of in a way, to a degree, but it's nice making the rules.
So if people want to find out more about your practice, where can they find you?
So I am at milfordgriefTherapist.com, or you can just type in my name.com, Nikki Sewell. So Nikki Sewell, SEWELL.com.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story today, Nikki.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
I really appreciate it.
To go from an interview, because I do remember talking with you, to like years later and still getting to see how, like you said, there's different iterations. There's been different iterations of Zinni. Like it's an ongoing metamorphosis in your business.
Yes.
And I love being able to see you transform and move through different parts and phases of it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. If you want to check out Bootcamp, you can go to bschoolbootcamp.com/about and get on the interest list and check out Nikki. Thanks so much, Nikki.
Thank you. Appreciate it.